The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the program. Lots to talk about today. It's become very popular in some circles lately to debate and argue about what is, quote, socially constructed. What is a social construct? Is gender, for example, a social construct? Is race a social construct? And there's a lot of spirited debate happening around those sorts of questions all the time. Many of those debates happening in bad faith, by the way. But okay, at least they're happening and it's a conversation that people are having. What is undoubtedly, clearly, unequivocally a social construct is crime. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that the actions that are considered crimes are socially constructed. If you kill someone or steal something, you did the thing. You stole something or you killed someone. That is a real thing. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that what society considers a crime is literally a construct of that society. Having marijuana be illegal is not objectively a reality. It is a decision that a society constructs. Smoking pot is not objectively a crime or good or bad. Some societies choose to criminalize it. Okay, so I think we sort of understand that concept. We're quickly learning how terrible of an idea that is. It costs money to criminalize marijuana. It fills up prisons to criminalize marijuana. It turns people into individuals who on average commit more serious acts of violence and get involved in activities that are truly bad for society by virtue of being locked up and put into the system because of pot smoking or pot possession. And those marijuana laws are applied in a racially tinged way. So I think at this point the evidence is clear that it has been an absolute disaster to have marijuana criminalized. We have some good news about that issue. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, who we've talked about before on the program, yesterday decided to drop more than 3,000 open marijuana smoking and marijuana possession cases that date all the way back to 1978. 3,042 cases related to pot smoking and possession, which had outstanding warrants for people as well as underlying charges pending, and they've been cleared and the cases are set to be sealed within the next 90 days. Now, an important detail to understand about this is that these aren't cases where someone's already been convicted and they're being let out of prison or having prior convictions erased. These are cases of marijuana smoking and possession where there has not yet been a conviction, usually because the accused never showed up to court. They ended up with an outstanding warrant, a couple different scenarios, but these are not prior convictions. So this is a very good thing. There's no doubt that this is a good thing. It's also good that a decision was made earlier this year by the same Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance, to stop prosecuting simple marijuana smoking and possession cases. That's all very good. The next thing, though, is we've got to start vacating some of the convictions for these same so-called crimes, because once you say we're no longer going to prosecute marijuana possession or use, once we say we are going to get rid of all of these outstanding warrants for people initially for complaints that were initially for possession or use, what about the people that are currently locked up for that stuff? That's a bigger battle that hopefully will be fought. And in the meantime, what we're seeing is the continued progress of legalization and decriminalization around the country. Now, that's a particularly difficult thing to do when the Attorney General is Jeff Sessions, right? One of the most anti-pot Attorney Generals in a while, a guy who said he used to sort of think the KKK were pretty all right until he found out that they smoked pot. So more broadly, we need different guidance, a different perspective at the federal level. We're not going to get that under Jeff Sessions, but that's okay. Progress can still be made while Jeff Sessions is Attorney General. And then bigger picture, this is one of my new things that you're going to hear me bring up a lot. When we think about reforming the justice system, yes, we need to stop the war on drugs. We need to stop the criminalization of marijuana in the way that it's been done. But what progressives need to simultaneously do is, while we advocate for reform around laws regarding the war on drugs, we need to keep reminding everybody who will listen that the justice system more broadly needs to shift its focus from individual offenders of sort of like street level type crime to white collar criminals and crimes committed by corporations. That's the massive bias that exists in our policing and our justice system. The focus on the individual street crime over the corporation, as well as the almost total wholesale ignoring of white collar crime, which is considered, they almost have their own prisons, quite literally. And what we need to be pushing for is, if we are going to have a more equitable and fair justice system in this country. Remember, the people in power, the people who make the rules, they don't want that, which is exactly why it's an uphill battle to change that status quo. So while we talk on, we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. While we talk about ending the horrible policies of the war on drugs, we also have to talk about prosecuting white-collar crime, as well as, no question about it, we have to talk about the future of white-collar criminals and the prosecution of corporations. Remember that totally farcical claim that Mexico was going to pay for the United States-Mexico border wall that Donald Trump planned to build? I guess he still plans to build it. Not only was that completely unbelievable at the time, not only is that obviously not happening at this point, but the new one is, and I hope that you're ready for this absurdity. The new one is that the Trump administration is going to give money to Mexico. We are going to pay Mexico to help us with deportations. Many aspects of the Trump administration are reminiscent of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I've talked about this with you before. This particular story is more like George Orwell's 1984, where everything is the exact opposite. And much like the goalpost moving that's taken place in other areas of this administration's first year and a half, the wall has been one of the most glaring and obvious failures. And if it weren't for the lives that are being ruined by Trump's immigration policy, the entire immigration fiasco of the Trump administration would be the stuff of comedy. Again, were it not for the fact that people's lives are being ruined. So let's talk it through. The first position was Mexico's going to pay for the wall, and it became clear immediately that Mexico was not going to pay for the wall. Mexico said they weren't going to pay for the wall. No reasonable person believed for a second that Mexico was going to pay for that wall. So then Trump shifted to, well, we're going to get the money from Congress for the wall. We're going to have them appropriate the money for the wall, which is very different than Mexico paying for it. Getting the money through congressional appropriations is you're going to pay for it, right? Taxpayers are going to pay for it. But that also didn't go super well, and what they did were some very small sort of symbolic appropriations of money, but big picture we shifted from Mexico will pay to Mexico won't pay, but we'll do it because you're going to pay. That gets us to this morning. The New York Times is now reporting that we will pay Mexico $20 million to help us with the deportation of people from Mexico to other Central American countries, often people coming through Mexico into the United States. So the idea is we are now, rather than dealing with it ourselves when people get here, we're going to give Mexico money and tell them to deal with it when people enter Mexico from Central America. The Trump administration sent this notice to Congress recently, and we have now come full circle. We've moved from, we are going to fix the immigration problem by Mexico paying us, right, building the wall for us, they'll pay to build the wall, to we'll all pay for the immigration stuff through taxpayer money via congressional appropriations, to we are now going to pay Mexico to help us fix the immigration problem. I thought that Trump ran on making the best deals. I thought he ran on winning again. And remember when the strongest case that could be made against John Kerry was that he changed his mind. Donald Trump has regularly made completely impossible promises, gone on to do the exact and total opposite time and time again, with barely a consequence from his followers. Giving Mexico money for people to go back to other countries in Central and South America is the exact opposite of Mexico paying us for building a wall to stop people coming in from Mexico in the first place. And then there's the tail end of this sort of farcical cognitive dissonance, which is the Trumpists will claim that this actually makes perfect sense. The defenders will say, or we know that they're saying it, I visited websites this morning where the Trumpists hang out, they're already saying it. They are saying, David, the United States already pays for these deportations. When individuals from Central and South American countries go through Mexico and make it into the United States, the United States is already incurring the costs of deporting those people. It's cheaper if we have Mexico do it. We save way more than what we're paying Mexico. It's cheaper to give Mexico the money. That's a different argument. That is a different argument than the one that Donald Trump made, which was Mexico would be paying us to deal with the undocumented immigrant problem in the United States. Now we're doing the exact opposite and paying them to deal with the problem. Am I missing something here? Is there some masterful 5D chess move that this represents that I just don't understand? Let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Couple people I want to say thanks to today. Today's new David Pakman Show member of the day is Eric Hanna. Eric, thank you so much for your support and for being a David Pakman Show member, and of course getting all of those great member benefits, including the daily world-famous bonus show. Also want to say thanks to today's sustaining member of the day. North Lily has been with us since 2013, more than 5 years of membership. Eric, North, thank you both. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code VOTESOON18 is available. It'll save you 40%. A lot of new members in the last 48 hours. It warms the heart, the number of new members we've had in the last 48 hours because of our big news about the studio moving and promo and all of that stuff, but I'll catch you up on what's going on with that later. Nearly 8,000 of our viewers regularly participate in political discussion and debate and conversation on our subreddit. I regularly visit the subreddit. I know Pat regularly visits the subreddit, and I invite you to visit at davidpakman.com/reddit, REDDIT. Very, very important issue was brought up this morning on the subreddit, and it relates to the upcoming midterm elections, and it is about voter deregistration. This is just one story where a user said, went to verify my voter registration today, no record of me being registered despite having voted in the previous elections. This is not a unique problem, and I am not saying this to be conspiratorial. I am not saying this for any reason other than a lot of people have been emailing me saying, this is not going to be my first time voting. I have not moved. I've had no change of address. I've had no otherwise change of status. I've not been divorced and changed my name. There is no reason whatsoever for me to no longer show up as a registered voter, and I am not showing up as a registered voter. So we often end up realizing that this is going on very shortly before an election. So what you need to do right now is, number one, confirm that you are registered. At this point, I believe that the deadlines have passed for registration in many states, although not in all. I think you can still register up through October. Of course, other than states that have same-day registration, look into the rules in your state. But if you're someone who has voted before and you assume that you are registered, my recommendation is make sure that you're actually registered. And the number of people who have been telling me I am not showing up as registered is very, very concerning to me. And if you are not registered and the deadline has passed, you do need to contact the Secretary of State or voting officials, even the Federal Election Committee, and explain, here's my record of having voted before or of having been previously registered or whatever. There is no reason I should not be registered here. I need to be able to vote in November. Very, very important. And even though it's horrible, I'm glad that it was posted about to the subreddit. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, a story about Politicon. I mentioned earlier this week that I have been invited to participate in Politicon, but that a lot of people in the audience have been saying, David, that is the lowest form of political debate. Please don't participate. And I asked for feedback. The overwhelming response, including from this subreddit user, is that I need to go to Politicon, and that no matter what the format is, no matter how toxic the entire milieu of right-wingers who are going to be there debating is, that my presence would only help if I go and I do my thing, which is the same thing I do when I go on Fox News or on any adversarial media. So that seems to be the consensus as of now. I still have no idea, by the way, what it is they want me doing there. I know Kyle Kulinski has already been told he's debating Ann Coulter. I know some of the other people that are going have been told what they're doing. I still haven't been told, and I'm emailing them every couple days, and I don't know what's going on. So for people saying, am I doing a debate one-on-one? Am I participating in a panel? Am I going to be moderating a debate? I have absolutely no idea. And I've told them, I typically, before any kind of speaking engagement or public thing, I'll have like 6 or 8 weeks to prepare. And at this point, we are only 5 weeks away, based on the based on October 20th and 21st or 22nd, that those dates are. So I'm not keeping you in the dark. I just don't know what I'm going to be doing. Join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit, davidpakman.com/reddit. Okay, so we're continuing to flesh out our understanding of that Trump Tower meeting that took place involving Trump campaign officials and Russian agents, including attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. And initially we learned a meeting happened, right? But we were told no one really knew what it was about. It wasn't specifically to get help with the election. We weren't really sure that they were Russians, the people that were meeting with us, and that it related to the campaign. We didn't really know about it in advance. There was no follow-up to the meeting. Nothing burger was a term that was advanced by Trump's cronies and people on the right. Over time, we've learned that most of that stuff wasn't true. We learned that the meeting was very much anticipated. It was very much planned, that Donald Trump personally likely knew about it and approved of it, that it was specifically to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from a foreign power, and that it represented the intent to accept things of value from foreign countries for the purposes of winning an American election. Criminally speaking, it doesn't matter whether or not they got the dirt. What matters is that they were willing to, and they met, and they very well could have gotten that dirt had it been provided at that meeting by those Russian actors. That's what we knew before today. The new news is that a series of very suspiciously timed money transfers have been identified that took place both right after the Trump Tower meeting and right after the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And those are now being investigated very closely. And this relates to Aras Agalarov, who was involved in a series of money transfers from overseas accounts to move money from Russia and Switzerland to the British Virgin Islands, Bangkok, and an office park in New Jersey right after that Trump Tower meeting. And two of the recipients of those funds were participants in the Trump Tower meeting. 4 federal law enforcement officials said to BuzzFeed News that there were 2 bursts of what they're calling banking activity, one right after the Trump Tower meeting, the other right after Donald Trump's election, that are being looked at in detail. One of the accounts in question belongs to Emin Agalarov, who's the son of Aras Agalarov. He was involved in the planning of this meeting. That account had been dormant since 2015, when the money first started coming in. Money was also sent to an account belonging to a company connected to Rob Goldstone. Goldstone is the publicist for Amin Agalarov, who originally set up the Trump Tower meeting. One of those transfers took place 11 days after the meeting and was for $19.5 million from an offshore company owned by Agalarov to his account at a bank in none other than New York City. These, of course, could be just coincidental transactions involving the people connected to that meeting taking place just after the meeting, going to bank accounts in the exact location where the meeting took place. But do we really believe in those coincidences at this point? And I want to be clear, just because something is suspicious doesn't mean that there was wrongdoing or that there was criminality. But it is another angle in this entire investigation. And following the money is often a really smart way to go about this type of investigation. And of course, if this all had nothing to do with the presidential election, nor the Trump Tower meeting, or any of it, we should ultimately be able to figure out the sort of benign and totally above-board reasons why such massive amounts of money were moving in this way and with this schedule involving the people who were connected to that meeting. Will we ever get those answers? I don't know. I don't know. But in the meantime, the drip, drip, drip continues, and nothing exculpatory or even potentially exculpatory has surfaced so far. That's what we keep sometimes missing in terms of missing the forest for the trees, where there will be some story related to Trump Russia. And the defenders will say, this isn't 100% verifiable proof of wrongdoing. Fair enough, it's part of the investigation now, but nothing has taken place in the last, what has it been, a year and a half at this point? 2 years nearly of at least suspicion about this stuff. No big exculpatory events have taken place, and that is something that the Trumpists simply don't talk about. They will take any individual story and say, this source isn't the most trustworthy, or this isn't definitive evidence of a crime, or no one has been indicted for this particular thing so far. That may all be true, but wouldn't you think that if all of this stuff were bogus, that after a year and a half or more, we would have had some major exculpatory moment? And instead we haven't had that. We've had more evidence, building piles and pyramids and concentric circles of evidence. Now, what do I think big picture is the ultimate reality of the Russia story? I've been getting more and more emails from people saying, David, I get the day-to-day reporting about what's going on, but what's the big picture here? Like, what do you think took place? I think the most likely scenario is that Donald Trump's involvement with rich Russians started a long time ago. And it started with Trump as sort of the useful idiot. It started with rich Russians using Trump to launder and legitimize their wealth outside of Russia in particular, mostly through real estate transactions. This led to conversations about Trump having trouble getting loans from sort of more reputable financial institutions. Funny to even call them that, but more reputable, I guess, than random dudes in Russia. And that ended up with Trump doing more financial business with the Russians. And he essentially got in too deep. And it could be in too deep out of ignorance and greed. The oligarchs ended up using him, and they happened to be Putin connected. And it slid into what ultimately took place in the 2016 election. Beyond that, it's details, right? Which parts were criminal? Was Trump willing or coerced in his involvement? Those are the only questions that really remain, but I think that that is roughly the big picture of what it is that took place here. I want to hear from you, though. What do you think is the big picture, aside from the Trump-Russia meeting, Rosneft, Alfa Bank, Natalia Veselnitskaya, all the details? Stepping back, what do you think is the big picture of Trump-Russia? I am on Instagram at david.pakman. A lot of exciting behind-the-scenes and political stuff happening there. And make sure also to follow The David Pakman Show on Instagram. We now have our own Instagram account. We are publishing video clips there. We are on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Quick break, the homeopathy debunking episode of the Pseudoscience mini-series is coming up next. I think most people are going to like this one.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today we are going to get into one of my favorite episodes of the Pseudoscience miniseries and one of my favorite topics. It is the topic of homeopathy. I've spoken about homeopathy before on the David Pakman Show. I know that there are people who are not going to be pleased with me for this episode, but I believe that it is a great episode and I am so excited to play it for you today. Homeopathy as part of the Pseudoscience Debunked mini-series. Let's take a look, let's take a listen. In this episode of the Pseudoscience mini-series, I'm going to talk about one of the most widely practiced types of alternative medicine and a total and complete pseudoscience, homeopathy. Time and again since its inception, homeopathy has failed to be proven effective for any type of medical condition. Many comprehensive studies have shown that when patients receive homeopathic treatments exclusively, their health only improves due to the placebo effect or because of normal recovery that would have occurred anyway, called return to the mean. Homeopaths, people who practice homeopathy, say that the foundational principle of their philosophy is that, quote, like cures like. As the National Center for Homeopathy says on its website, a medicine can cure a sick person if it can cause a similar sickness in a healthy person. And they give an example. If you peel an onion, your eyes burn, they itch and they water. You might also have a runny nose and begin to sneeze. If you had similar symptoms during a cold or allergy attack, like a runny nose, watery eyes, and sneezing, a homeopathic microdose of the remedy Allium cepa, red onion, would help your body heal itself. Don't make the mistake of overthinking this, because there's nothing to overthink. Homeopathy is as nonsensical as it sounds here. And along the same lines, another common homeopathic remedy is to give small doses of certain types of coffee to someone suffering from insomnia. Homeopathy posits that a substance that causes a symptom in a healthy person will alleviate the same symptom in an unhealthy person if given in small doses. And that is homeopathy's second premise, that the dose has to be small and diluted in order to work. And in fact, homeopathy asserts that the more diluted the remedy is, the more effective it will be. This also contradicts everything we know about how the world and science work. The tradition in homeopathy is to dilute the remedy with either alcohol or distilled water. If the remedy is a solid that can't be dissolved in water, like seashells, for example, which is a common homeopathic medicine, the solid should be ground up and mixed with lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. What is it about alcohol, distilled water, or lactose that make the remedies more effective? Nothing, but homeopaths refer to this process of diluting remedies as succusion. And they say that the process of succusion is what releases the remedy's, quote, vital energy, and the more the substance is diluted, the more powerful it becomes, which of course is illogical on its face, because under almost all circumstances, diluting a substance cannot actually make it more potent. In most homeopathic concoctions, the original substance is actually diluted to the point of being essentially absent from the mixture altogether, meaning that homeopathy often contains no active ingredients. For example, one common method of succusion is to combine 1 part substance with 10 to the 24th power pure water, in which case there is only a 60% chance that the resulting mixture will contain even 1 molecule of the original substance. But the founder of homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann, recommended that most remedies be diluted 3 times more than that. And Hahnemann, a German physician, developed homeopathy in 1796. This was before science discovered the concept of standard atomic weight, which taught us that if a substance is diluted enough in another substance, the diluted substance will physically disappear from the mixture. So Hahnemann, of course, didn't know anything about that. But today, we don't really have the same excuse because we now know about science, and homeopathy ignores
very simple, well-established chemistry facts. For example, a popular homeopathic remedy for treating flu symptoms is to combine 1 part duck liver with 10 to the 400th power parts of lactose. It's mass-produced in tablet form. It's actually pretty popular in France, and it is a total and complete sham. According to homeopathy, the mixture has to be exactly 1 part duck liver to 10 to the 400th power parts lactose, and it's a strict formula. However, there are only about 10 to the 80th power atoms in the observable universe. Therefore, for someone to consume 1 molecule of duck liver from this mixture, they would have to eat a cube that is 10 to the 55th power light years wide, which is much, much wider than the universe itself. Basically, the concept of this homeopathic duck liver lactose mix is so ridiculous that it's difficult to describe just how ridiculous it is in a way that the human mind can even comprehend. So whether it's commercially produced or homemade, it either contains 100% lactose and no duck liver, or it contains way more duck liver than is actually prescribed by homeopathy. Some manufacturers have gotten away selling pure lactose and only putting duck liver in Latin on the label so as to not be legally liable for promising that it even contains any duck liver at all. Homeopaths believe that solvents like water and lactose are able to retain what they refer to as a, quote, memory of the substance that is being dissolved, even when the substance is dissolved to the point of there being no mathematical possibility that a single molecule of the substance remains in the solution. And although it violates the elementary principles of chemistry in the ways that I've explained, this concept of, quote, water memory is a key mechanism by which homeopathy supposedly works. So the pseudoscience behind how homeopathy works doesn't hold up, but still we should ask the question, does it actually work in people? Well, what's important to know is that people can experience positive results after receiving any kind of unscientific treatment, meeting with anyone, including a homeopath, to talk about your medical issue and undergo any sort of treatment. It is enough to put many people in a better state of mind about their health. This is by way of the placebo effect, and many people just don't realize how powerful that placebo effect can be. It's been proven that your thoughts and emotions can have a very significant impact on what goes on in the rest of your body. Organs regulated by the nervous system, like your heart, your stomach, your lungs, they're directly linked to your brain, and so they are very susceptible to placebo. A 2011 review of neurobiological findings published in Nature reports that merely visiting a homeopathic practitioner is easily enough to change the chemistry and circuitry of the patient's brain, even if the practitioner administers no treatment whatsoever that would otherwise be medically effective, and this makes people feel better. There's a 2013 review of studies examining homeopathy's relationship with placebo, published in the Royal Society of Medicine, which explains, quote, we can attribute meaning to therapeutic encounters with culturally sanctioned authority figures, and we can use our attachment to such figures to generate hope for recovery. The context of the clinical encounter and the relationship between the healer and the patient are imbued with meaning and enshrined in ritual. So when you visit someone whose treatment methods you believe are effective, just meeting with them can make you feel better, even if the actual treatment they give isn't medically sound. But as far as homeopathy's actual effectiveness in treating medical conditions, in and of itself, the burden of proof lies with the homeopaths, but all supposed evidence for the effectiveness of homeopathy has proven time and again to be a result of insufficient methodology. And meanwhile, there's plenty of evidence pointing to homeopathy being completely bunk. Rigorous homeopathy trials exist with high methodology standards, and they have unanimously shown that the practice is useless when the studies are done properly under double-blind conditions with a control group receiving no treatment of any kind, in order to compare people receiving no treatment, people who think they're getting homeopathy but are getting a placebo, and people who think they are getting homeopathy and are getting homeopathy. There's a 1997 paper published in The Lancet which looked at 186 clinical trials testing homeopathy and stated in its conclusion that, quote, we found insufficient evidence from these studies that homeopathy is clearly efficacious for any single clinical condition. There are many of these. In 2002, the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology published a huge meta-analysis of controlled clinical trials of homeopathy, and it concluded that scientific affirmations of homeopathy are due to biases by the publications themselves. Another comprehensive study finished in 2014, which led the Australian Department of Health to study homeopathy's effectiveness in treating 68 different medical conditions. The review concluded that homeopathy had no positive effect on any of the conditions, including asthma, arthritis, insomnia, the flu, eczema, cholera, burns, heroin addiction, and many, many others. There's another study led by the Australian Department of Health, finished in 2015, which reviewed 1,800 other studies and confirmed once again that there is, quote, no good quality evidence to support the claim that homeopathy is effective in treating health conditions. Homeopathy advocacy groups are famous for lying, misusing data, and taking scientific findings about homeopathy completely out of context. In 2010, in a statement to the UK Parliament, the British Homeopathic Association quoted a 2000 study in the European Journal of Clinical Pharmacology as saying, quote, there is some evidence that homeopathic treatments are more effective than placebo. But the British Homeopathic Association left off the rest of the quote, which says, however, the strength of this evidence is low because of the low methodological quality of the trials. Studies of high methodological quality were more likely to be negative than the lower quality studies. As is the case with other types of alternative medicine and health-related pseudosciences, a fear of evidence-based pharmacology is motivating many people's inclinations to practice, receive, and defend homeopathy. It's a folk tradition that runs in many families, and some people just don't like the idea of taking pharmaceutical drugs for a range of reasons that are sometimes irrational. According to the National Institutes of Health, over 6 million people in the U.S. use homeopathy. Frighteningly enough, about 1 million of those people are children being administered homeopathy by their parents. Homeopathy really is a special kind of pseudoscience in that it actually manages to have multiple layers of BS that are scientifically unsound in completely unrelated ways. Homeopathy ascribes false healing powers to various substances, like saying duck liver treats the flu or venom from honeybees can treat allergic reactions to bee stings. But then homeopathy also goes on to say that the more diluted a substance is, the more potent it becomes, which flies directly in the face of everything we know about the science of pharmacology. And then homeopathy goes as far as pretending to defy the basics of physical chemistry by saying that solvents diluting substances ad nauseum are even capable of retaining remnants of that substance through this memory that they claim exists, for which there is absolutely no evidence. And then, of course, put all of that aside, scientific studies have illustrated that homeopathic treatments aren't medically effective. But the homeopath has already shown us that they aren't too fazed by what science says.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to do a couple interesting polling stories, not just normal polling stories about the horse race, but polling stories that really go to a lot of what is underlying sentiment in the United States right now in our political system. Yesterday, I mentioned to you that 49% of Americans in a recent poll said that impeachment proceedings should start against Donald Trump. This by itself is already a stunning number, but it's sort of softened, I guess you could say, by the reality that starting impeachment proceedings isn't necessarily saying Trump should be removed. You might just believe there's enough evidence to warrant starting those proceedings, but you're sort of open to whatever conclusion those proceedings might come to. That was yesterday. There is now a new poll which says that 47% of Americans straight up think that Donald Trump should be removed from office, period. And with every one of these polls that are historically shocking, like this is historically a shocking number, my shock continues to be that only 47% of Americans believe that Donald Trump should be removed from office, which gets me back to what I said yesterday, which actually most of the time when I say something negative about a group of voters, even if it's a group of voters that most people in our audience disagree with, I will get some emails from people saying, David, it's better if you don't say that. The optics aren't good about you saying. I did not get that when I said yesterday, if you don't believe that this man is a systemic danger to the United States and to the world, you are part of the problem. And that's where I return today. If you think that what's going on right now is even remotely okay, you are either unaware of what's going on, sort of like an ignorance is bliss type of thing, or you are part of the problem, because it's embarrassing that merely 47% of the country thinks that Donald Trump should be removed from office. 47% is a high number looking back at other presidents, but it is way, way, way too low considering what it is that we're dealing with today. And I was interested in looking at this in the context of history. As a point of historical comparison, I went back to Richard Nixon, because increasingly we see more and more sort of parallels between Watergate and the Trump fiasco administration presidency. I believe that when Richard Nixon ultimately resigned, somewhere between 55 and 57% of the country believed that he should be removed. So the numbers are not that far from that point. So most importantly, step one here, no matter where you are on impeachment, indictment, resignation, removal under the 25th Amendment, whatever. If you reject the agenda of Trump and his cronies, you need to vote every single one of them out in November. Every single one that is up for re-election needs to be voted out in November. That's just a little over 7 weeks to go. Then we need to have this conversation about what is wrong with the people of this country, because something is very wrong that only 47% think that it's time for Trump to go. And we've talked about, there's all sorts of these rules of thumb in politics, like 20% of the population will always support the president, 20% will never support the president. It's the other 60% that can sort of be swayed by what actually happens. And that's probably a factor in what these numbers are. I think that these circumstances are so extenuating and so outrageous that they really should be going well above and beyond what these historical numbers have been. And when it comes to Watergate, by the way, I think that the Watergate comparison is apt, not in terms of the seriousness or scope of what was done. We at this point know what it was that Richard Nixon did. We don't yet know what it is that Donald Trump and his cronies have done. The parallel nature of Watergate and Trump includes the way in which Trump's behavior has become increasingly erratic as a result of the investigation, the ways in which Donald Trump has tried to suppress that investigation in the way that we saw done during Richard Nixon's time, the ways in which Donald Trump has turned the investigators themselves into the enemy, even though there's not any evidence that they're actually the ones guilty of wrongdoing. So there are definitely parallels in terms of the subject matter, in terms of what was done by who and when. We're going to have to wait and see. But what I do want to talk about next, and this is the next poll we're going to discuss today, relates exactly to the smearing of the investigators. So another set of polling that I want to talk about today relates to, it sort of relates to the earlier poll I cited where 47% of Americans want Donald Trump removed from office. There's a new SSRS poll that was conducted for CNN, which shows that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's approval rating is higher than Donald Trump's in terms of their handling of the Russia probe, which is both meaningless but also very important. So let's sort of break this down. In general, when you compare the approval rating of an elected official with a non-elected official, it's not a hugely relevant comparison, right? Melania has a higher approval rating than Trump. Okay, well, she's not an elected official. She does totally different things. First ladies commonly have higher approval ratings than the presidents. The reason that this matters, even though Robert Mueller isn't a politician, is that the repercussions of Mueller's investigation depend on politicians. What Republicans have been trying to do is to smear Robert Mueller, make Mueller the villain, make him out to be a partisan hack, even though his party is the same as Trump's, right? It's the Republican Party. They're both Republicans. And the goal of this smear campaign has been that if Trump fires Mueller, maybe people won't really care if people don't really think that Robert Mueller is doing the right thing or carrying out an unbiased investigation. If Mueller comes back at the end of this entire thing and presents brutal findings about what Trump and his cronies did, it's safer for Republicans to do nothing about it if the public has been turned against Robert Mueller. And that's why it matters, despite the smear campaigns and the concerted effort to discredit Mueller and his entire investigation. It matters that Mueller still has a higher approval rating than Donald Trump. If this is the case, hopefully, maybe possibly is a better word to apply to it, maybe there will be pressure on elected officials, if it's still Republicans who are in power when we get Mueller's findings, maybe there will be pressure on them to act instead of ignoring them, in part because Robert Mueller is just a partisan whose findings don't matter. When you look at the numbers, as I mentioned in the case earlier today, it's kind of depressing, right? Like the number of people approving of Mueller's handling of the investigation should be way higher, and the numbers approving of Donald Trump's handling of the investigation should be way lower. Trump obstructed the investigation, is trying to get it ended early, has fired people, including FBI Director James Comey, to try to get in the way of that investigation. Trump's actions regarding the investigation may be criminal, and yet people only approve of Mueller's handling of that investigation by a marginally larger amount than they do of President Trump's. This is part of the crisis that we're dealing with. And use whatever word you want, right? Deplorable, whatever word you want to apply here. I don't care what word you use. It is an embarrassment internationally. And I've been speaking over the last 3 weeks, I've spoken to people in Denmark about what's going on with Trump. Finland about what's going on with Trump. Estonia, a lot of people as part of their digital democracy projects, and also in France about what's going on with Trump. I tell you this only because I think it's interesting. The Trumpists are emboldened by hearing that people in Europe think that Trump's a disaster. The world is stunningly confused about not only what is going on in the United States, but also why it hasn't been stopped. And I've had some interesting conversations with people to make it an understated point. Two very interesting sets of data, and it is a very good thing that the smear campaign against Robert Mueller, at least it hasn't worked well, I think is fair to say. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. That voicemail number is open to you 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter where I am, doesn't matter where you are. If you've got Skype, Google Voice, a regular phone, whatever, you can call 219-2-DAVID-P and leave a voicemail. Troy York left a voicemail yesterday, and I'm going to play it for you in a second. If you're not familiar with Troy York is truly a longtime listener of the David Pakman Show. And what's particularly interesting about Troy York is that every single one of his voicemails are hugely negative, hugely critical of me and of the show. The show's a disaster. We're just all horrible. But you can tell that he listens to and watches every episode because he knows everything that's happening on the show. So something is keeping Troy York here. Let's take a listen to what he had to say last night, early this morning.
Hey, David Pakman, you are stupider than a pancake. You people on the left are upset because you ran one of the most corrupt political insider candidate of all time and expected to win in the landslide, and Trump upset your plans. You corrupt racial identity bastards. You belong in a country that's free falling and declining. That's not America, but that's your native Argentina. The peso's dropping. Venezuela, as well as a loser country. And your program sucks ass.
Yeah, this is so funny because none of this stuff is coherent in any way. Like, number one, the peso in Argentina has been falling significantly. There's a big currency problem there. What that has to do with the quality of the David Pakman Show, I don't know. Saying that I'm in any way connected to the pushing of Hillary Clinton to be the Democratic nominee, I voted for Bernie in the primary. So I was not, yes, when it came to election day, I was not voting for Donald Trump, but I was not somebody pushing for Hillary to be the nominee. I was pushing for Bernie to be the nominee. And then lastly, can't they stop talking about Venezuela? Like, I'm a critic of Venezuela. The left, there's a Leninist a contingent of the left that hates me because I criticize Venezuela. So I don't even get the point of mentioning Venezuela in the voicemail. But you know what? I don't get the point of a lot of Troy York's voicemails, so that's probably not hugely surprising to you. On the bonus show today, Sean Hannity expects Donald Trump to fire Robert Mueller after Hurricane Florence comes and goes. We have a new study which suggests that full-fat dairy, not that skim stuff or that low-fat stuff, full-fat dairy may boost longevity and health. And we will also talk about the woman who flipped off Donald Trump's motorcade a while ago. Don't even remember when it was. She's now running for office. Would you vote for her? And would you do it on the basis of her having flipped off Trump? I think the answer to the second question for me is an obvious and definite no, but we will talk about what she has going on. Get access to the world-famous bonus show. Pat will be joining me on today's bonus show from Boston David Pakman Show headquarters for a few more weeks. We talked about that yesterday. www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code VOTESOON18 is available. You can also get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Both options get you access, and I will speak to you in mere seconds on that bonus show if you are a member or patron.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.